So welcome to the next presentation in our historic speaker series. Today we have Steve Borell, and he will be talking about Henry Lungstrom. So just a little bit about Steve. Steve grew up here in Lindsborg. He then left Lindsborg and went to K-State. He has 2 engineering degrees. He was in the Air Force for a while, and then he has spent 45 years in the mining industry. So we would like to welcome Steve and thank you, and I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Lenora, excuse me. This has been really fun putting together a talk about Henry. I did it actually about 1.5 years ago. I started it with I was asked to give a presentation on Henry to the Smoky Valley Historical Society, and then I've been adding to it and making changes to it. But yeah, Henry was a good friend of mine, and it was real fun to go back and put this together, recapping things I knew and finding out from others. At the end of the talk, you'll see a list of people that I've spoken with about Henry. I got little bits and pieces from a lot of people, so that's been it's been a lot of fun to reconnect with folks there also. So the topics are basically Henry's family and background, followed by machinist and manufacturer, and how he was community minded and the genius that he was. And he was, like I said, he's a friend of mine. From a background standpoint, he was born 1891, farm southeast of Lindsborg here, 9th of 11 children. His mother died when he was only 6 years old. His father did not believe in education and for his children, and believed school was a complete waste of time. And I look back at that and say, oh my goodness, what if Henry had been able to get a mechanical engineering degree or some other engineering degree from Kansas State or somewhere else. But any case, his oldest brother, George, and this to put into some family names here, he was father of Harold and Jean Lungstrom, and also Arvid, who was known as Slim, and Arnold, who was known as Fat, and Evangeline, she died as an infant, and then Evangeline married Leland Cuban, and Leon and Marion. It was interesting to learn from some of these the people I talked with. Evangeline, Leon, and Marion, they lived with Aunt Laura, married to an Hagstrom who had been, had come to Kansas on the orphan train. And one time, the father, Andrew, he came over to Aunt Laura's house and said, give me those kids, and specifically Evangeline. And Aunt Laura said, no way, you get out of here. These kids are going to get an education. And indeed they did. Evangeline went through high school. Leon was subsequently got a PhD, and he was a professor at Bethany for many years. Marion was a pilot in the Air Force, and I'm not certain, but I believe it was he died in a training accident just right at the time of the war. But then, there at the bottom I mentioned Leon was a Bethany prof in science and biology, and his wife Linda came as a cellist, and that's where they met. And she both taught cello, and she also was a pianist and taught piano at Bethany. So here's the family, the whole crew. the whole crew before the youngest two were born. They were born after this picture. But of course, Andrew and Matilda, the parents, and then the children. The tallest of the boys there, that's George. He because of his father, evidently, he didn't believe in education either, and he was the one that went to get Evangeline and the others from Laura, and they said no. Well, on Matilda's lap, that's Henry. That's Henry right there, and on the left is his brother Harry. And this is from Grundahl's book. Very nice picture. Thank goodness for Grundahl and what he provided for us as history for the community. Henry's nickname, because there were so many Swedish names in Lindsborg, many folks were given nicknames just to keep them separated. And Henry became known as Dirty Jack, but his slightly older brother Harry was known as Clean Jack. Harry was a barber, and I think it was Enterprise. It was either Chapman or Enterprise, but I believe it was Enterprise. And he always wore a suit. His shop was clean and meticulous and everything. And let's just say Henry was otherwise. But personally, I took offense when I heard people calling Henry by that nickname, and I was quick to tell him what his real name was. Here's a picture of a postcard of the Hagstrom manufacturing building. Excuse me. This is on 425 East Lincoln. You can see the facility there. It's pretty impressive. I believe this was from about 1911. It was actually incorporated in 1907, I believe. And but there's the building, and we'll come back to that later. Hagstrom Brothers, incorporated, like I said, 1907. And the subtitle is Manufacturers of Automobiles, Electrical, and Hardware Specialties. The management were Hagstrom's for president, for treasurer, for secretary, and then the superintendent was Edward Lungstrom. And the paperwork said that they had branches in Chicago, New York, Minneapolis, St. Louis, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Lindsborg. And that was on one of their product brochures. But they also had offices in Boston, Buffalo, Philadelphia, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Denver, and Montreal. Now, what's the difference between a branch and an office? I'm not sure. But they also at some later date, I think it was probably 1911, they had plans for new branches for Washington, D.C., Baltimore, Atlanta, New Orleans, Seattle, and Los Angeles. Now, why Los Angeles was on the list twice, I don't know. But the Hagstrom Brothers Manufacturing in that building that later became Henry's, their primary products were tire liners, patches for pneumatic tires. They even patented that item specifically themselves. And spark plugs, porcelain tube cutters, extendable, retractable hanging light cords, and an automatic bale hook for storing hay in barns. And there were other items also. Here's a little advertisement for the spark plugs. It gives all the good reasons why they're so good. Excuse me. And then there's a cutaway of a spark plug on the right side, and that and that was a giveaway, a paperweight they gave to people. Here are some of the spark plugs they made. Eventually, Champion Spark Plug Company bought the patents, and I don't know if they were purchased from Hagstrom or if they were purchased from a later owner. But in any case, they made spark plugs for quite a few years. And these are thanks to Leland Erickson. He had these out in one of his sheds. It took a little bit of cleaning up, but yeah, Leland had a whole bunch of stuff from Henry. Oh, excuse me. Here's another layout of the products. You have the patch in the center at the top. You have the spark plug, of course, on the side, and then you have the porcelain tube cutters. And here's the lights, extending lights. There's a better picture later of that. And in the bottom center is the picture of the facility. And I don't know what this was on the back side. I don't recall ever. There was nothing back there when I was growing up in the 60s, 50s and 60s. And but this other building here on the front side, on the east, this direction is east, and that length of the building is north-south. But this building here, it was changed, and I remember that very clearly. But so and it might be this was just an artist's rendering of what they thought it should look like. Packaging and shipping area in the back of the building. This would have been at the far north end of the building. And you see there's a lot of product it's going somewhere. One of the things I read said that they were asked, well, why would you put your facility in the middle of Kansas like that? And they said, well, hey, we're right in the middle of the country. It's a perfect place. We have 2 railroads coming through here, and we can ship stuff anywhere in the United States very rapidly. And so they thought this was a beneficial place to have a manufacturing facility. But this bulb right here, this is that extending light bulb. Okay, you pushed a button on the side of this, and it would go. You could raise it up or lower it down to get that light excuse me, closer to your work area. And this was one of the things they manufactured in the plant. So what happened to Hagstrom Brothers? Well, let's look at a little bit of legal and ownership. 07, it was incorporated. But by 1913, they were in bankruptcy court, and I think I have some ideas for why that was the case. 1914, it was sold to Lobenberger and Merrill for $8,000. It was actually appraised at $75,000, but nobody was willing to pay that for it. So in any case, it sold for that, and that, of course, I'm sure that went to creditors. But then in 1915, only a year later, it was sold to the Nygren brothers, and they moved primary manufacturing to Kansas City, Missouri. And then about 1930, Henry obtains the business, and there's a big gap there, and I do not know the whys of it, but I have some what I consider contributing factors right here. This isn't what anybody else has said. This is just, as I read the material, this is what stood out to me. They had difficulty with the capacity in Lindsborg. They were selling products so fast that they could not keep up. And so that was a challenge for them for a period of time. And then also, you have to believe that competition came in. And maybe on the spark plug, maybe the patent would not allow somebody else. But all the other products, maybe big corporations probably able to grab onto them and make it at least same price and be located closer to the market. I don't know. But but I also, and I think maybe more importantly than that, I'm gonna call it management challenges and overreach. The running of a business, like this is, it's great to see 4 or 5 local guys go to town and really go good, but this is a huge undertaking. and I think they probably got overextended. You look here, the branches, they had these branches and they were going to add more branches. And then they also had these offices. Uh, and, and this was all, before 1913. So this was all in 07, 08, 09, in that period somewhere. And then, excuse me, of course, in 1929, the stock market crashed, and so that was probably the death knell for the existing company of the Nygren brothers at that point. But I think the difficulty of managing and financing a business like this, and with that many offices, my goodness, that's a huge challenge. Okay, so products and projects by Henry once he got the business. And again, I'm thinking 1930. I did not go to land records, ownership records of the property. You could find it there, but I did not get that done. Excuse me. Other things he built, manufactured, were a grease gun filler. So you take a tub of grease, or a 5-gallon bucket, and you put this filler pump on top of it. And so you pump the grease out of the bulk bucket into your grease gun. So you don't have to monkey with it and dig it out with a spatula and put it in and put the plunger back on the grease gun. So very very good piece of machinery for you. Lathes of all type and other machining work that he did. The vertical and horizontal milling machines, turret lathes, those kinds of things. Also, foundry and heat treating. I worked on both the lathes in the shop and also in the heat treating area. And then expert repair and consultation for different problems that people came up with. Henry was also very community minded. He built a small car. We'll see pictures of that. Rode high bicycle and parades. He bought this steam locomotive, a 14-inch gauge steam locomotive, and that was across the street from the South Park there, across from where the swimming pool is. Currently, it's a mobile home park right there. But and then he was on the fire department, and for many years, and I was told that he always drove the LaFrance truck. Now that's a big fire truck. It's a chain drive. Anyway, it's down at the Old Mill Park now. It is not on display, but it's getting ready to get on display at some point. Excuse me. And then there's something called shooting anvils on the 4th of July that we'll talk about later on. But here's the car. And except for the picture of Henry sitting in his mama's lap, this is the only picture I have ever seen of Henry without a beard. That's the little car. Took parts from over 100 different automobiles to make this car, and this was 1931. So this was shortly after when I believe he first obtained the building. And this would have been right in front of that's the front door here on the left upper, into the office, which was a short distance, and then the shop beyond that. Here's the high bicycle. That's not Henry. This is Henry driving the car. And so he clearly has the beard there. I can't see the pipe, but he usually had a pipe in his mouth. I'll make another comment on that later. Here's the car right now, or this was a few years ago. John Anderson came up with this photograph, and we don't have any idea where it is now, but that's what it looked like the last time somebody saw it. There's Henry on the bicycle, or with the bicycle in front of the south door to the shop. That's just another picture of Henry with a scythe fork. Here's the railroad. Excuse me. This This locomotive, the 14-inch gauge, also known as the Midget Beltline Railroad. Now, I don't know if that was the folks in Newton that called it that, or just where that name came from. But it operated in Lindsborg from the 50s until 1962, and then 62 to 88, 1988 in Newton, and then it was moved to St. Louis Iron Mountain and Southern Railroad in Jackson, Missouri, also known as Burketown. And it's there to be rebuilt now. I talked to them back in 2020, 23, and I also talked to them just just a month or so ago, and the rebuild is not coming very fast. It's all volunteers, and they have a large steam locomotive, and I think they probably focus their time on keeping it running for tourists. They operate the locomotive every Saturday, they told me. And so if you want to ride, you can come down there, not on this, but on their major locomotive. Another picture of the locomotive when it was in Newton. And here's where it was. It was also known as a 484 Hudson class steam locomotive. And I've looked back and forth between this picture and the previous one. So there's that. That's the first one. And then here it is now. Well, the bell's gone. They've changed the smokestack. There's a bunch of stuff off the side here that's been taken off. Here on the cattle guard, they've taken stuff off of there. So they'd already began tearing it down whenever that picture was taken. This is the location, 110 miles south of St. Louis, called Burketown. Another name for it is Burketown. Okay, so shooting anvils. This is an anvil used by a blacksmith. This is without a doubt the nicest, biggest anvil, not biggest, but nicest anvil I've ever seen. This was my dad's. My brother has it now. And this is a steel anvil as compared to a cast steel. So shooting anvils, the inside underneath here there's an open cavity in there. It goes up something like that. And on this end, there is a hole from the outside into that cavity. And so what Henry would do is he'd take one anvil and put it upside down, and then he'd put another one on top of it, and he'd put black powder in the cavity in between, and then he'd take a 1/2-inch bar of iron, 1/2-inch round steel, and heat it up with a furnace or a blowtorch or something, get it red hot, and then he would put it in that end. Excuse me. And when he did, it popped. And those that recalled hearing it, seeing it, said it would go, anywhere from 4 to 6 feet high. When again, this is the way the top one would look. There'd be another one on the bottom, turned just the opposite way, and so this one would jump up in the air. So that had to be a quite a 4th of July event. I never saw that, but there's just another picture of Henry. World War II, and some of the support that Henry provided for Boeing, Beechcraft, and Cessna at the time. This is a modern milling machine, but it was a milling machine not dissimilar to this. This is with all kinds of digital displays and everything else on it. But excuse me, Boeing had purchased a new Bridgeport mill, and this they couldn't get it to work, and so they got a hold of Henry. Well, we got a hold of the factory, and the factory said, "Listen, there's a war going on. We can't send somebody out to look at the machine. You're going to figure it out yourselves." And so somebody suggested Henry, and Henry okay, that's fine. So he had the guy's phone number on a piece of paper, and he went to Wichita and he came to the gate. And every facility had guards around it, and the Boeing facility for sure did. And these guards, what's this scruffy old bugger going to do? What he can't. We don't have a use for him. And Henry dug around in his pocket and he came out with, well, here's the guy that called me. Here's his phone number. So they called him up, and that was the general manager. And he said, bring him to my office immediately. And they did. And he the gate had orders, whenever this guy comes, you bring him into my office immediately. But so he went in, looked at the milling machine a while, figured out what wasn't quite right, and lo and behold, the machine was off and going within a few hours. That's one of several stories. Yeah, both Boeing and Beechcraft tried to hire Henry full time, but no, he didn't want to live in Wichita. And on several occasions, he was there to help each of them with problems. Excuse me. But Boeing asked him to come for a problem in the guards. I mentioned that they wouldn't let him in. Yeah, but Henry had royal treatment after that time. I mentioned the Bridgeport milling machine, and that's the picture you saw earlier. Beechcraft had him making some parts for very tight tolerances, and I never heard what those were, but they were clearly in 1 or 2 thousandths, maybe less than that. But so the parts were delivered, but they couldn't get them together, and so they called Henry, said, hey, these things don't fit. He said, well, what have you done? Well, they're here on the shop floor, and we tried to put them together. And he said, well, take the one and put it out in the sun for a little bit, and the other one put it in the fridge for a little bit, and sure enough, they fit right together then. And so you had to minimize the one and expand the other, and that's how you did it. But Henry designed a special device that would swivel for loading bombs on aircraft. And one time, 6 months without any invoice sent to Beechcraft, and excuse me, Walt Hoffermill, he was the bookkeeper, and he reported that Beechcraft wanted to give us an invoice, Henry, and so he sat down with Walt, and Walt typed it out, and Henry just did it from memory about how many guys on which days. They looked at the calendar, and okay, on this day, how many guys and how many hours, and sent them their invoice. And then there's what I'm going to call a unique machining project. We don't necessarily think of Lindsborg as a major contributor to the war effort, but this for sure was. A couple of fellows came to the Henry shop one day, and they had a drawing, and they laid it out on the table, and they said, Henry, can you make this? And he spent a little while and looked at it, and he said, yeah, I can do that. I got the equipment. I can make that. It was a complex, small device. And so he didn't think anything more of it. They left, and a month or so later, they came back and said, Henry, we want you to stop everything else you're doing, and we want you to make these devices. We want 3 of these right away. And so, they also asked him at the first time, do you have material on hand? Oh yeah, that he had material. So Henry, it took 2 or 3 days of machining and work, and they had brought in cots for Henry and for the people with the company there that were buying these things. And so Henry, they brought meals in, they had the cots there, and he worked just as much as he possibly could. And the guys left with the parts, And somebody local asked Henry, said, Henry, what in the world is going on down at the shop? And he said, what do you mean? He said, well, there are guards all the way around it. And lo and behold, these bombs included a trigger assembly that Henry Lundstrom made. The first atomic bomb at Hiroshima, the second at Nagasaki, and the third one was it was named Strike 3, and it was at Tinian, the island Tinian also, but it was never and it was loaded on an aircraft. It was ready to go, but after the two, they didn't need a third one. As a matter of fact, as I researched a little bit about this, I learned that the authorities, i.e., our government, expected it would take multiple atomic bombs, and so they were prepared to be manufacturing one a month. But turns out, thank goodness, the two were sufficient. So anyway, but the trigger assemblies for those two bombs came from Henry's shop. Some odds and ends. My dad, Charles Borell, he went with Henry to Kansas City several times. And Dad said Henry would, they'd be trying to figure out where they needed to go. And Henry would move around so he could see a couple of smokestacks. And once he saw the smokestacks, then he knew where to go next for the next place they were going to visit, machine shops or suppliers or whatever they were. But anyway, overhead drive lines, two locations down the length of the front part of the shop. I'll show you a picture from the old mill so you can get a sense of what those overhead drive lines look like. Chimes for the telephone. I remember so clearly. I can't remember the tune, but I'd recognize it if you played it to me. The chimes that would ring. Henry did not like phone ringing, but the chimes, he liked that. So he had his set up on chimes. And I was told the best way to get Henry interested in working on something is to suggest that, well, you probably can't fix this, or I don't know if you can make this or not. It's pretty complex, and all of a sudden you just challenged him, and off off he goes, and he'd fix it for you. Somebody once challenged him also, bet him $5 that he couldn't make a shaving. I don't know how many feet it was, but so Henry chucked up a piece of metal in the big lathe and put a put a small pipe there for it to go into, and he just ran that lathe, and it made this shaving about 3/4 of an inch wide by at least 12 feet long. And Henry won the bet. I remember that piece of shaving in the ceiling. Henry had tied it up against the ceiling, and so you could see it in there. It was right near the heat treating area. But and then old Missouri Pacific. They of course, the Missouri Pacific Railroad came through Lindsborg at that time, and they stopped an engine, and evidently they couldn't get it started again. And they called their headquarters, and I don't know, they both Denver and Kansas City. They said, "Oh my gosh, we don't have anybody we can send out this short. It's going to take a week or many days." And so somebody said, "Well, there's a machinist here in town that's pretty sharp," and so they went and got Henry, and Henry went over there, and he evidently tapped on a couple things, and within 30 minutes it started right up. My guess is there was some kind of a vacuum lock on it, but anyway, it started right off at the power plant. which was just across the road, across the Union Pacific tracks from Henry's shop. They had a flywheel for a generator. It wouldn't fit on the shaft. And oh my goodness, this is probably a 6 or 7 inch diameter shaft. And Henry just told him, he said, "We'll just get a whole bunch of dry ice and pack the shaft with dry ice and just warm the flywheel up. Don't heat it high, but warm it up." And once they did that, hey, it went right together. I mean, that's the same thing you do on drag lines and shovels in the mining industry. Is you shrink one down and you heat the other piece up. Number 8 on there, a tar pot. He was evidently heating up to repair the roof on his shop down there, and it blew up, and it just absolutely covered him. His beard, his reading glasses, they are what likely saved his life. He still had scars on his face from it, but anyway, and down his shop, you could barely walk through the narrow aisles, but he knew where everything was. He could find the tools, material, parts, unless somebody decided to help him. And Pellegrino worked there for a couple of days, and he decided he needed to straighten some stuff up, and Henry fired him because he couldn't find what he was looking for after he had started cleaning up. And the same happened to Harold Patrick and Harold Nelson. They all 3 tried to straighten the place up, but Henry knew where stuff was. Linda Lundstrom, she told me in 1996, her husband Leon, went down there. She had lost a tightening screw for a bass, a musical bass instrument, the great big ones, and so it was a European-made one, and they went down there, and Henry looked at that a little bit, looked at the one that was there on the instrument, and he went over, and it took him quite a while, but here he comes walking back. Guess what? The exact screw that she needed. And so she was duly impressed with that. This is the overhead belt line. This is from the old mill, but you would have a motor in one end of the building, and you'd bring belting up to to flywheels up high in the ceiling, and then they would turn a long belt line, and then off to each machine, and depending on how fast you wanted it to run, you'd change the size of the pulleys. Here's a little sketch. The motor Henry had was 5 horsepower, and this thing was over 3 feet in diameter, and it sat in that general location. If this was the entire shop length, it sat there. It had a belt going up to the ceiling, and then it went across to this belt line and this belt line, drive shafts. And then each of the machines along here would bring a belt down to it to run that particular machine. This was a chimney here and a furnace. I spent dozens of days in their case hardening parts from my dad. But this is the Henry I remember. That's the way he looked. Had that hard hat on, had a suit coat, and usually even more covered with oil than what this one is, and that pipe, cigarette tobacco velvet. He always had that in his pocket. Henry had a Chevy Coupe. I'm guessing it was like a 48 model, but I remember when I was 6 to 10 years old, he would drive. My dad's business was on West Lincoln, just west of what's now Dumstrot, and across the alley there. And Henry would drive down there, and and he'd have a piece of iron sticking out the back, whatever. And But then in 1956, my dad built a new shop at 410 East Lincoln. Now that's 2 blocks directly north of Henry's shop. And my dad and Henry were good friends. And later, my dad, myself, and my brother Robert, we often worked in Henry's shop using his equipment that Dad didn't have. He had, I said, milling machines, turret lathe, a large lathe with a large turn radius, heat treating machinery, equipment, all things that my dad didn't have. But that aluminum hard hat, sports coat pipe, heavy reading glasses, ragged pant legs on his bib overalls, and the can of tobacco. Soft spoken. I had never heard him raise his voice. The pipe was nestled in the center of his beard, and I'll point out to a couple pictures and such where others have had it shown it excuse me, sitting off to the side, but I don't ever remember it off to the side. It was always in the middle, surrounded by well-singed beard. Front of his coat covered with oil spattered. He had old guns, and Jeff Peterson, he remembered that Henry would often ask him about old guns, if he knew of any other old guns from from the old settlers. My dad's shop was just 2 blocks to the north, and after Henry's car quit, or they decided he shouldn't be driving anymore, he would walk down to the shop. It was a muddy kind of a road, and then I'd drive him back to his shop, give him a ride back. And the case hardening, that's where the heat treatment we did there for pull chains for what my dad built called lift hitches. We did that there in that furnace in a bath of liquid cyanide. Henry, he had these ragged, the ragged pant legs. And any number of times, my dad would be cutting with a acetylene torch, and he'd sniff and he'd say, "Henry, you're on fire," and he'd lay the torch down and sure enough, Henry's legs were smoking, and sometimes more than others. But the bottom fringe was all frayed, and of course the splatter from a cutting torch would ignite it. And any number of times, Dad had to put his torch down, lean down, and pat Henry's legs. I don't think he was ever injured by that. But final chapter. In about 1966, there was a fire in the south end of the building. And Henry at this time was 75 years old and did not have the money or the energy to repair that. But his daughter, excuse me, Henry's sister, Virginia, and her husband, Harold, that's where Henry lived for the 20 or so years that I knew him. He lived with them. They decided to sell all the contents at an auction in '67. Well, they tricked Henry so that he wouldn't know that this is going to be happening, and until the last minute. And the car was sold in the auction, and Willard Kading, he used his winch truck. So you picture these lathes and such. What you do is you put down a slab of steel, and you put down pieces of pipe, and you pull it with a winch truck, and you roll it. You put a new slab of steel down, and then you move the pipes around the front, and so you move a heavy lathe or a milling machine, whatever, move it out the door that way. And he said Henry was there, and he cried and cried until someone finally took him to the house. And on December 31st, Henry died, and I have to believe it was with a broken heart. Everything he had worked for, the love of that machinery, and just working there, all of that was gone. And so here is a painting on acrylic on canvas by John Bashore of Henry. But see where John put the pipe? I always saw it right square in the center. And I looked at some pictures of Henry, and the singed area of the beard was in the center. It wasn't off to one side. Here is Power Construction. That's their that's the corner where that building used to be. That 400-foot long building was right here. And then this was a building that Henry started, just a storage building. Never got completed. The sides didn't get put on it because it turns out that the street that does exist over here 2 blocks to the north, that street right away goes right through that building, and Henry didn't know that or appreciate that, whatever. But so the city stopped him at that point. How Powers got go ahead and do it, I don't know. That on that corner, that is my dad's building. That's just the edge of it right there, 2 blocks away. And but that's what this is what 425 East Union looks like today. There's Henry's gravestone out here at Elmwood. And here are the various ones that I spoke with to get ideas and get stories. Chester Bruce was my history professor, or history teacher at Lindsborg High School. And at some point he required reports to be written, and 2 different times, one by Darrell Hanlon and one by Stan Hefta. Good little reports, and I learned some stuff from those that I wouldn't have known otherwise. So anyway, these are various other people that I spoke with about Henry and about the shop. And there's this again. This is Sandra Hudson Keller. She lives in Hutchinson, but I told her that she was in my class in high school, class of '63, and I told her that Henry's pipe was never there. It was always right here in the center. But she said, "Oh, I wish I'd have known that." But this is about oh goodness, that's at least 2 feet high, 18 inches to 2 feet high. And this is a picture I took at the San Sane gallery when it was there on display. So with that, thank you very much. Hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Steve, for a great presentation. We are going to open it up for questions and answers in just a minute. But I did neglect at the beginning to say that this was a project of Smoky Valley Historical Association in partnership with the Lindsborg Old Mill and Swedish Heritage Museum, and that this series is being funded by a grant from Humanities Kansas.